All right, guys. So we're here today making a video that we're definitely not used to making, and hopefully we'll never be used to making. Um, it's a story in the MMA world right now that you just have to cover, even though it's a very uncomfortable subject, and that being about Conor McGregor and the civil suit against him in Ireland. For those who don't know, Conor McGregor has been found civilly liable for the 2018 sexual assault of Nikita Hand by a jury of his peers in an Irish court. He owes her 250,000 euros, which is approximately 257,000 US dollars, and there were no criminal charges pursued, and we'll kind of get into that as the story goes on, because we will get into the story, Nikita Hand's story, Conor McGregor's side of it, and before we do, though, like I said, it's gonna be pretty graphic, and obviously you guys saw the warning in the beginning of the video. We're going to get into the gritty details of it all, and so if that's something that makes anyone uncomfortable and you just don't want to hear that, like I said, I recommend clicking off the video now because it's gonna get pretty bad. But again, I think people who care about this sport and care about Conor McGregor and his career, I think that this stuff is too important to not dive into. I'm sure you kind of agree with that. But
Yeah, in a way, this is something like a culmination of sorts for all these things with Connor that are still worth talking about, but you'll still see Conor McGregor out in public or whatever, all over, news headlines and social media and all that. Just for whatever reason it might be, whether it's because he's got this new something to do with business, or because there's talking about how he might fight again or something, who he might fight. But uh, yeah, yeah, it's just kind of just now it's like blossomed into this huge deal now that I think a lot of people are like facing it and don't actually want to get into try to make not even as not assumptions or opinions and stuff, because you have your right to your own opinion, but they might feel a certain type of way where it's like, oh, they're just afraid of the reaction they'll get from uh, an audience, so they either just keep it to themselves or just toe like a fine line of what it really is, also because it is Conor McGregor. So like at the end of the day, people are still gonna be out there for clicks and stuff and engagement and stuff, and just that grand attention at the end of the day. But like you gotta, when it comes to something as serious as this, like you can't really leave out any concrete facts or details. So
yeah, and part of it for me too, and we were talking about this earlier in the day, like it's one thing to read the headline that he was found civilly liable for sexual assault, but when you get into the details of Nikita Hand's story, it's just it's a lot worse than it looks just reading the headline, and that's kind of why we wanted to make the video, kind of get into the story a bit. And like I said, I know we love focusing on the sporting side of MMA when we do our podcast, and we try to avoid these types of controversial topics and things that make people super uncomfortable, because at the end of the day we're just trying to grow the sport.
yeah,
But
it feels like something that's been brewing with Conor McGregor for a little while now, and so not to say that we were prepared to talk about this, but um, like one of our most highest viewed videos is titled "What's Going On with Conor McGregor."
which was a
That was
totally different accusation of sexual assault, which, to be fair to McGregor, was never proven really in any way. This one is way worse, and obviously, like I
yeah.
said, he was found civilly liable.
So people are gonna only say things that they feel like their audience might want to hear. So in the sense, it'll come off as they're trying to defend Connor and just reassure that things are gonna be okay and stuff, and like, oh, well, he's still gonna fight again and stuff, because that's not even the point whether or not he's gonna fight again. We're still gotta wait till see more details and stuff come out. But and what he's actually convicted of and stuff. But um, yeah, it's just like, yeah, if you have a forum, an open forum like this, like a platform to express your thoughts and opinions and stuff, then you should use it.
Yeah, I
And
just feel like we wouldn't be doing our jobs like covering MMA for you guys if we didn't get into this whole story and both sides of it. You know, we're not going to be giving our opinion really on the story itself. We're just going to tell you guys all the facts, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation of what like the aftermath might be. But we just want to
yeah,
get into
dude.
this story to kind of
I mean,
fill you guys in.
the
But
guy has like really, it's really felt like he's just been off the deep end ever since this happened.
yeah.
Just like in that year, 2018,
Well,
uh,
let's hop into it though, because we have like we've been talking about our view on the situation and how bad it is, but let's like fill people in on what exactly the story is in case they don't know. But like I said, he was found civilly liable for sexual assault, so a jury found him liable of this crime, and he owes damages because of that. There weren't criminal charges pursued, and I'll get into why in a second. But just to kind of give her story, Nikita Hand's story about what happened. Again, this is going to be really graphic and honestly, personally, hard for me to even read for you guys. But in the interest of full disclosure, I think it needs to be heard. But McGregor and Hand, they grew up in roughly the same area in Dublin and like in the type of area where everybody kind of knows each other, even if it's like vaguely. Apparently, she knew Dee Devlin, Conor's longtime fiance, more than she knew Conor McGregor. But it was Nikita Hand and her friend. They were at a nightclub in Dublin, and McGregor and his friend happened to be there. They connected online, and then the next day they planned to meet up and party more. McGregor and his security and the friend, they kind of like picked Nikita Hand and her friend up in the morning the next day, and they arrived at a Dublin hotel where they spent like that day and night kind of partying. And both sides have confirmed that there was alcohol consumed by both parties, Hand and McGregor. There was cocaine consumed by both parties. And throughout this whole time, everyone was still in the room, but it was a penthouse suite in this hotel in Ireland. And, for those who don't know, though, penthouse suite obviously is basically just like an apartment in a hotel. So there's multiple rooms, because that was my question. I was like, well, if there were multiple people in the room, how did this happen? But then you think about it, penthouse suite, there's bedrooms, isolated rooms, so it makes a little more sense when you think of the layout. But anyway, she ended up alone in the bedroom with Conor McGregor, and he had been making advances already earlier in the night, which she verbally and physically rejected. And at one point, she was in the bedroom alone with him, and he pinned her. This is according to her. He pinned her onto the bed and began kissing her. She claimed that his weight was so much on top of her that she could only really move her head, and so the only way she could think to defend herself was to bite him. And said that really angered Conor McGregor, which caused him to flip her over onto like her stomach and basically put her in a rear naked choke. And she accuses him of basically choking her to the point where you're about to go unconscious 3 different times. And after that is when the alleged rape occurred. And it's just a horrible story. But then after that, she describes kind of feeling bewildered and very like confused. She woke up the next day after somehow falling asleep after this, and she was very confused, didn't know what time it was, even what day it was, honestly. And then she was still with McGregor and his friend, and they were seen on CCTV footage at the hotel, I think in like a hotel bar, like lobby, fraternizing, being on good terms, which is worth noting. Her side basically defends this by saying that she was in a state of delayed shock, and her brain didn't fully process what had happened, and probably just didn't fully register, and so that would explain why she was still with them after that. But yeah, and then the physical side of it, there is evidence that this did happen, so it's not like a he said, she said thing. And again, Conor McGregor never denied having sex with her. He just denied the nature of it. He claims that it was consensual. She claims it was rape. But there is a lot of physical evidence. There's photographs that were shown in court, but they aren't public, so we can't show them to you. Sorry about that, but it's just the way it is. But the photographs, apparently that she was bruised from head to toe. This part is pretty disturbing, but again, it just needs to be said because it's part of the story. Part of the reason why she said, well, not part of the reason, but she said no to Conor McGregor's advances physically, kind of tried to push him off before getting pinned on the bed. But part of it too is because she was menstruating at the time. And so her point was basically, even if she was interested, she still wouldn't have been able to due to that fact. And when she eventually did go to the hospital and the unit where they treat sexual assault victims, the tampon that she had in was wedged so far up her vagina that the doctor had to go in and remove it with forceps, which was described, and I can only imagine, as a very painful experience. And again, like I said, this is all pretty terrible, and it makes me honestly sick to even say that out loud, but it's what happened. Well, again, this is alleged, but when the court says that he's liable for it, a court of law basically said that this happened, so take that however you will. But that's her side of it. Conor McGregor's side of it, obviously he's been defending himself, like I said. He said the encounter was consensual and that he's going to appeal the court's decision. And it is worth noting, too, that the reward of 250,000 euros, I mean, obviously that's a lot of money, but considering the nature of the crime, that's a pretty modest reward. So I think part of him bringing that up is to kind of like say that, oh, well, there's clearly some inconsistencies if they're not going to give her the full reward that she wanted. But at the end of the day, he was still found found liable for it. The other thing that was worth noting is that McGregor's friend who was with them claimed to have consensual sex with Hand twice after the alleged rape that next day, I would assume. And Hand denied this and even pursued legal action against the friend for it. But she did lose that case, so that is worth noting. And that ultimately is kind of why Conor McGregor wasn't charged criminally for this. Because again, you might say to yourself, well, there was all this physical evidence. How did he not get charged criminally? The reasoning is because apparently in Ireland, the threshold to get criminally prosecuted for sexual assault is it's pretty high. The prosecution doesn't really want to go after somebody for that unless there's a very, very high chance of conviction. And this whole thing with McGregor's friend kind of creates doubt in the story where the prosecution maybe didn't think that they could get a conviction, therefore there was no case presented. And that's why Hand ultimately decided to sue Conor McGregor civilly, because if there's no criminal trial, this is really her only way of getting any sort of justice or recourse for what she claims happened. And the only other thing that is worth noting on McGregor's side of it is that Hand was admittedly wrong about details that she gave police, including what hotel this happened at. And McGregor's side, they claimed that she did this knowingly because she knew that the CCTV footage would show them being on good terms socially in the lobby or whatever of the hotel. And yeah, there's other random details. You kind of alluded to this part in the beginning of the podcast, how this isn't the first time we've heard of stories where Conor McGregor, I mean, not even just sexual assault, but just violent. We've seen him get in trouble for violent crimes in the past, and he's been accused of different things like this in the past. This was just a very bizarre coincidence that wasn't allowed to be brought up to the jury because of how circumstantial it is. But Nikita Hand, her and her boyfriend actually had their home broken into during all of this by men with baklavas on, and her boyfriend was actually stabbed, and part of the reward that she was seeking was for the costs of relocating, and because they didn't feel safe in their own home anymore. And the only reason why I'm bringing this up, because you could say to yourself, oh, that's just a coincidence, but there was another case where McGregor was accused of misconduct on a yacht, and that woman subsequently had her car burned. So it's just odd that multiple times people have accused Conor McGregor of something, and then they're met with some sort of intimidation and violence. But again, there's no evidence that that's even linked to him, but it is just worth bringing up because it's a very, very bizarre coincidence. At the very least, you have to admit that. But again, can't prove it. But just wanted to point it out because it is weird. And yeah, it's a horrible story. I mean, that's basically the gist of it. I'm sure that there's more details that I could dive into that are more, legal oriented and are just a bit more confusing. But I really just wanted to tell the story and then McGregor's defense of it. You've heard both sides of it, and that's what we have here. And again, an Irish court, not just a judge, a jury of his peers agreed that he was liable for this crime and that he owed her money because he owes her money because they found him liable of this crime. So you have to take that however you will. It's worth noting he's not a convicted rapist. You can't call him that, and he was never charged criminally, so that's also worth bringing up. But in civil court, this case, all the evidence was provided, and the court found that McGregor was liable for sexual assault in this case. So that's where we are right now with it. Obviously, he said he's going to appeal the decision, and we'll see what ends up happening with that. I'm sure someone will cover that as time goes on. But yeah, just in general, to kind of put a bow on it and start our conversation, it's a pretty horrific story, to say the least. And whether you think he really did this or not, he admitted that there was a sexual encounter. So even if you don't think that he did this non-consensually, this is still a guy who has a longtime fiance and young kids and admitted that he cheated on her. So at the very least, he committed adultery and embarrassed his family, which is, again, that's not a crime, but it's still just a really bad look. And, I've said all the facts to preface the personal side of it, how I feel. You look at those details and you watch the videos that were shown of her after the verdict came out and just how emotional she was about it. It's a story that I feel very differently about this one than I did about the other things that have came up in the past that had limited evidence. This one, it's really hard to look at it unbiased and say that this didn't happen. I truly don't think that this was something, this is a money grab of some sense, because that's what McGregor's side is trying to portray. But it's a horrific story no matter how you look at it, and it doesn't paint McGregor in a good light at any rate, like I said, because either he raped this woman or he consensually had sex with her and just embarrassed his fiance and his children and his family, and that ultimately, either way, makes him look like a pretty bad guy. But to go into the aftermath, there's a lot of questions. What is going to come of this for Conor McGregor, because he's obviously not going to jail. So I guess the first part of the conversation that we could go to is with the whole UFC side is, do we think that the UFC should cut ties with Conor McGregor because of this? The only brand that I've seen so far that has cut ties with McGregor due to this is, if you guys are familiar with the Hitman video game series, they have, I think, like a DLC where you could play as him or with him or whatever. I'm not totally educated on that, but I've seen that he's associated with them. They dropped him, and anything with him associated with the game will not be available anymore. So I'm curious if the UFC would follow up with this, but I guess, I don't know, what do you think should be, or what do you think people should look out for the next things in this case? Because obviously, we have a verdict in it now. It does not make McGregor look good at all. I guess just what do you think is the aftermath of all this, and where do you think we go from here?
I think it's gonna, I think already his character and just who he is as a person, that's probably not even in question anymore. I think a lot of people, by now, it's pretty clear that and he's never really been a great guy, but
I mean,
he
in the
seems to.
beginning of his career, he was very humble, like when he was first getting into the UFC and stuff. But it really seems like since he got that money,
Money
especially
and
the
the
Mayweather
fame.
money,
It's
like
pretty, yeah, and it's pretty
sad.
amazing. It's sad and pretty amazing, I guess, what money and fame, that kind of money and fame can do for you. Considering, he's once again, he's not going to be going to jail, and like we said about how people um, are just like willing to bite their tongues about it, or even go out and defend him.
Which I've seen and is
Yeah,
just
like I
disgusting.
wanna
Like,
I wanna link that with the people in the baklavas and stuff, and just the people that are meeting whoever's accusing him with the violence and intimidation. You mentioned whether or not he's linked to it. I think
you can't
there's
prove it. You know
you
what I mean?
can't
Like,
prove it, and he could legitimately have nothing to do with it. It could just legit be people that are so gravitated towards and attached to Connor, and just like that, whatever it's called, it has to be some sort of syndrome when someone feels so connected to a celebrity that has no idea who they are, and just
yeah,
like
I guess like
the
obsession. Really, I mean
obsession,
that's
like a
obviously not the.
stan or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so they will, yeah, they'll take this step further and like just to like make sure that this person's reputation and stuff is remaining intact, and because they probably have really nothing to lose, and who they're going to do this for has everything to lose. They're okay with doing this, and in a way it's, the irony is that Connor's nickname is the notorious Conor McGregor. These people are okay with, hey, if this is gonna even get their name or something out somehow, some sort of recognition, they'll live with that notoriety. And
It's just such a messed up situation. And then, like, you look at it from the fight perspective, you know, we were last told that Conor McGregor is going to be fighting in the earlier part of 2025, and now it's like, what do you do if you're the UFC? Obviously, Dana White wasn't in Macau for the last UFC fight night, so nobody could really ask him about it then. But you'd have to imagine the next time he faces the media that this is going to be a topic.
you would
And
think, and that there should be like a special press conference centered around this.
I'm
But
glad you brought that up actually, because I didn't even think of that. You think about other sports and similar situations, like, you know, the NFL, like with like Ray Rice, things like that. These were topics that were addressed so fast by the leagues, and you know, the UFC obviously, for better or for worse, they don't meddle with their fighters and what they do outside of the cage much. We've seen that. And honestly, that's kind of why part of me believes that there's not going to be any consequences for Conor McGregor from the UFC side of it. I do think if McGregor wants to fight again, the UFC will give him a fight. You could argue all day about the morality of that. You know, that's not what we're going to be doing here. It's just, it's worth noting because you have to wonder, like, the UFC now is a publicly traded company too. That's the other thing. Like from the business perspective, it's not like they're a private organization where they could do whatever they want and there's no stakeholders. Like now there's more people who have a financial interest in what they're going to do in this situation. And if let's say they give him a fight and people are really upset about it, it could tank the stock price and obviously the shareholders won't be too happy about that. It's just it's interesting. And you know, I said it before the pod too. I think it's odd. It is odd to see people defending him and saying that the like. I think those people honestly didn't read the details of the case because, like I said, I get reading the headline, especially in today's world where you do see false accusations sometimes. It's easy to read a headline saying that he did something and thinking that it might not be true or that someone's just going for money. And again, that who knows, that could be the case. You know, at the end of the day, this case is all he said, she said. But what I'm choosing to go with is the fact that the evidence was displayed in court, albeit civilly, and then a jury of his peers said that he was liable and committed this act. So it's just bizarre to see people, like you said, holding their tongues about it and not wanting to get into it because, again, we're just trying to say all of the facts. You know, that's why I wanted to go through the whole story and just be like, you know, this is exactly what he was accused of and what they found him liable of. And if you hear that and you don't think it's true, you know, there's nothing that I can really say. I've said everything that I could say about it, and it's just. But for people who do think that he did do this and then still would support his career, that just makes no sense to me. And yeah,
Well, how it's just funny how the UFC will either take all this time or not even put out a statement at all, but they'll still use Conor, even if it's not about Conor. They'll still use Conor in some way for promotion and
yeah.
stuff. And yeah, for people that are trying to get that are new to the sport and stuff and trying to learn more about it, like obviously one of the first names you'll know about is Conor McGregor and the career he had and put together. But um, UFC will just use him as yeah, it's like someone. Do you want to live a life like this guy has because of what he did in the octagon, and they don't even realize like what he's actually now done.
Yeah, and
And
then you
being
think about it too, like you're alienating a group of possible fans. Like I know that most UFC fans are, men between the ages of like 18 and 34, but like there are women who do watch fights and obviously men have been sexually assaulted in the past too. Like it's not just like a one gender thing, but
hmm
you know, anybody who knows me like knows I'm not the type to grandstand at all, but it's like you're pushing away people who are victims who have been sexually assaulted. It's kind of like a slap in the face. You have a guy now who's been found liable for sexual assault, and like if you're going to promote him and make him look good in like promotional packages and stuff, what does that say to somebody who's like survived a sexual assault? Like you're now that the UFC, well we don't know that yet because the UFC's yet to even comment on it. But if they do go forward and let's say give him a fight and promote him, like what does that say about the UFC that you could do something like this and you could still get a fight and get paid a lot of money by the company? And like I said, that looks so bad because then there's people who maybe wanted to get into the UFC and they're a sexual assault survivor and then they see that this is the guy who they're pushing like that. And I get it, McGregor's the cash cow, he's going to make them more money than any other fighter, but that's where the morality of it comes in. You wonder what the
Yeah,
UFC is going
you
to do
want to
and
push
what is the
someone
right
as
thing to
a
do.
you want to push someone as a role model, then you absolutely can't do it with Conor McGregor.
No.
And even feel even in Ireland, they're probably like really shunning away Conor
Yeah,
McGregor and
I've read that he's not very well liked over there anymore. Like when he first burst onto the scene, it was seen as very inspirational because obviously he was on welfare and he made all this money and he became a champion so quickly. But it seems like since the criminal things have started to add up, like the accusations and the things that he has done, like punching the old man in the bar, throwing the dolly at Habib's bus at UFC 223, even just the things that he's been
yeah.
accused of with misconduct, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore the things that he's done outside of the cage. And not to compare it, but like it's a good basis to go off of. Like the only other person I could think of in the UFC who's been accused of like real crimes and like has almost gone to jail is John Jones. And to be fair to John Jones, obviously he's never even been accused of anything remotely like this, and that needs to be said. But the UFC in the past has been known to not really consider outside the cage issues, which is why I do think that he'll probably get another fight if he wants to. But again, you have to wonder the morality of that, and that's not for me or you to tell people. At least in my opinion, we have our opinions on it, but that's for you to decide pretty much. If you've heard all of the things in this case, you've heard her side of it, you've heard McGregor's side of it, and now that you guys, if you've been watching this whole video and you made it to this point, you know all the details, and that's up to you guys if you want to like support him and support the UFC for supporting him after this. And it's and again, this ain't the UFC's fault. It's not like the UFC could have prevented this or anything, but there has to be a conversation that's had if they give McGregor another fight and promote him, if that's the right thing to do. And I don't think you'll be seeing that on ESPN because of a clear conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Like notice how like when, for example, I think I brought up like Ray Rice, like in the NFL, when that happened, that was on First Take, all those shows every single day. This is a horrible thing that like he's been found
I
liable
think
for,
part
and we
of
haven't
it.
heard anything about it on the mainstream
I
media.
think part of that parallel you just made with Ray Rice and this is so in the mainstream media, even to this day, because obviously back then it was so much, MMA being regarded as this barbaric sport, and whoever steps in that cage to fight is a legit, maniac of sorts. But even to this day, like, you know, just a more casual sports viewer in general, um, probably just thinks about it, or even people that work at ESPN is like, oh well, he's a cage fighter. Like, are you really surprised that he's capable of doing something like this? And it's like,
Well, I think you could speak to this too, especially training like you do now. Like, oh, are you really that surprised? Yeah, you should be. Like, not every single MMA fighter has done something like most. I'd say 99.9% of the fighters in MMA are pretty humble, good people. And in our experience talking to pro fighters and UFC fighters, we've never really encountered anybody who was anything less than great with us. So, like, to see a guy who's like this, for people who think that it's like, oh, it's human cockfighting, that type of stuff, yeah, you should be surprised that an MMA fighter is capable of something like this, because it isn't exclusive to our sport, and it's. I feel like people are
exactly.
starting to kind of steer away from that viewpoint, especially now that the UFC is broadcasted on ESPN. And I really hope that if more comes of even now though, I think that this should be covered a lot more than it has been. I feel like the MMA journalists have been covering it pretty well. I think Ariel Helwani and Luke Thomas have had the best coverage of it so far, and they've gotten the most detailed. And MMA Junkie, MMA Fighting, they've gotten into that, like, the big platforms, they've gotten into it too. So, we've said in the past sometimes, like, oh, sometimes we don't really see the best coverage of things that maybe paint the UFC in a bad light. But to the MMA community's credit, it seems like everyone in our sport has covered this pretty well so far. But I personally would like to see the mainstream media and sports cover this a lot more, because if this was any other athlete, this would be a nonstop story. You'd see it on every show, every single day, until something happens with it. Like you said, the UFC hasn't even come out with a statement yet. So it's
Yeah,
just it's an
that's where
interesting
they.
thing, man.
It's where I feel like they hurt themselves and kind of, um, I guess, get in their own way, because we obviously have we're gonna have our conversation about one and PFL and stuff and what's
Yeah.
going
Well,
on with this.
technically, by the time this comes out,
Yeah,
they'll have seen that, right?
yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, but I get what
exactly.
you mean.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, that conversation we have, and then so there's UFC that you would think, okay, even because it's Conor McGregor, and because Conor McGregor has transcended UFC and just the sport in general and stuff, and made them all this money and brought in all this popularity. You'd think by now that they would still be able to just come to terms with this, and like, Conor hasn't fought for us in 3 years now. Like, this is what it is. He's obviously not officially retired. Everyone's anticipating this return, but we have to address this and just keep pushing forward, because we do have all these stars still, that we're trying to build and we can build and stuff. But when they just don't address it at all, it makes me think, like, are they really still this attached to Conor, and just whatever else goes on behind closed doors with between Conor's, business team or whatever, and UFC brass. So it's kind of disappointing in that way.
It's a horrible situation. I know I keep saying that, but like
Yeah,
the
because it
story's
is such a
horrific, man.
yeah,
Like,
exactly, because it is such a serious situation, and like once again, like, these are still human beings at the end of the day, and they should be accounted for and treated as such. And this goes for Nikita Hand too. Like, she deserves to be treated like a human being and not as an object, like Conor is once again being accused of doing, which is just a horrible thing. It's like, and you see her addressing the statement too, and how emotional she is and stuff, and it's like, yeah, no one should. It's she shouldn't. No one should ever have to feel so conflicted and stuff, and worried that it takes them this long anyways to be able to come out right with it and address it, and then get the justice that I'm sure she's longed for.
yeah.
And
Well, to be fair, I think she did this has been like an ongoing thing. Like I do think that this has been a thing. I think she first pursued legalizing, I think in early 2019. So
Yeah.
it this has been going on for a while. Don't
Yeah.
quote me on that, by the way. But like how, but I know this has
But
been brewing
yeah,
for a few years now. I think you've been
just
dealing with
must
this.
be like such a yeah, just such a arduous process and stuff, and a lot of sleepless nights and stuff.
Yeah, and
So
for both of them. I mean, this is not only. I mean, I'm not even trying to defend Conor McGregor at all, obviously, but like, even for him and his family, like, this is a horrible thing. I mean, his fiance, his
yeah,
children, like, this is
exactly.
something that they have to deal with, and that's a horrible thing, and it's a terrible situation that Conor McGregor has put them in. At the very least, like I said, even if you believe that this was consensual, he still did a pretty terrible thing, and it's pretty sad to see the sport's biggest star have like this is what we have right
Yeah.
now as the biggest star in the UFC, and it's really sad, and I do think that
But in
this
a
is bad
way,
for the
it'll
sport
still
and
be
him.
this never-ending cycle of people trying to still uh, really stick their nose into it and find all these just I guess sort of semantic kind of things for to defend Connor and come to his defense where it's like you know you're sure maybe you're putting so much effort into trying to stay educated on this but like come on like this isn't some slap on the wrist sort of misdemeanor thing that Connor's being accused of you
Right.
know like this isn't worth really breaking your back to try and come to Connor's defense.
Yeah. And
It's
like
not
the way
even.
I view it, and again, just to be clear, this is my personal opinion. I've read all the facts, and you guys can think of whatever you want of those, but this is my personal opinion. To think that McGregor didn't do this in the way that it's being described by Nikita Hand, I think you have to go through so many more mental gymnastics to
Yeah,
have
and
his
like
version of it
why?
work.
It's not
Like
worth it at all.
that's what I'm saying. It's just a like I to put a bow on it, and to end the episode here because
What's
it's
worth
truly
it is
nauseating to
just
talk about.
yeah.
But
What's worth it is dishing out all the details and story and facts like we just did,
right,
and just holding the civil conversation and stuff, giving all sorts of viewpoints, all while still having sympathy for a victim like Nikita Hand and all of that, and
yeah,
yeah, just holding Connor accountable as a adult,
yeah. I mean, like I said, the
adult with
found
such a
liable for
huge
sexual assault.
adult
So
who's the face of a business obviously like UFC and has impact has this platform and the stuff that he has and the name that he has so
yeah, I mean, as a fighter, he's changed the game for a lot of people, and that's something that you can't ever take away from him. He's the biggest star that MMA has ever seen, and I think it'll be that way for a while. And time will tell how much this will stain his legacy if it does. But like we both just said, we've given you guys all of the facts from the case from both sides, Nikita Hand's side, Conor McGregor's side, and it's up to you guys to decide what you think of all this information. And we just felt that covering the sport, it's our duty to kind of lay all of the facts out and not just say the headline, actually give you guys the real details behind the story, and you guys can judge it however you want to judge it. And we're not the morality police, you know what I mean? We're just two guys covering the sport, and we think that this
yeah
story is
dude
something that
like
should be heard.
nobody
So
nobody ever wants to because I woke up on that morning where the news what was it Friday or something
I
like
think it was
that
Friday, yeah.
and I woke up and saw the headline and stuff and I did kind of just like but it was because in the moment it was just like
Yeah,
I
it's
was
like
like so like just like disappointed I guess and like angry about it knowing that we would have to
probably
come
talk
and
about
sit
it.
and talk about it and stuff it's
Yeah.
obviously still a conversation definitely worth having and we definitely had a great one just now but still it's like you don't ever want to read about this stuff and like
Yeah.
just somebody that obviously had made such a huge impact on the sport you love and
Yeah.
stuff so
You'd
yeah
rather talk about him in a positive light for all
exactly
the
we're
good that
trying to
he's
talk
done,
about
but
him exactly
it's tough.
nothing yeah
It's
yeah
definitely
trying
tough,
to talk about
but
what he does inside the octagon and stuff and just yeah actual positive stuff he's doing outside of it with his platform, his fame, and his money. But no, it's the opposite. He's got all his fame and money, and all he has to do is just use it pretty much to freaking get by with terrible stuff like this. So
Yeah. So to wrap it up, I mean, I'm sure you agree this obviously wasn't an easy conversation to have. Neither of us like talking about this type of thing. I don't think any normal human being enjoys talking about anything remotely like this. But again, this is MMA. Conor McGregor is the biggest star in the sport, and we cover this sport. So therefore, in our opinion, we need to cover stories like this, even though it is very uncomfortable. And to tell you guys the truth on a personal level, just reading the gritty details of Nikita Hand's story is not something I enjoyed doing at all. Definitely a low point in my opinion of having to do this podcast. Not something I ever hope to do again, honestly. But you guys have all the facts from the case that I could dig up and find. Obviously, like I said, Luke Thomas, in my opinion, had probably the best coverage of this scenario. He talked to an expert who's been covering this case in Ireland. If I can, I'll put a link to that video in the description, because I do think that Luke Thomas is one of the best journalists in MMA right now. Definitely somebody who I look up to as an aspiring journalist in this sport.
Yeah, that's definitely something that should be viewed a lot more than it's going to be.
Yeah. Like, my point is people should do everything they can to look into every detail. Like, I put as many details as I could, but I'm sure there's little things that I've missed here and there. It's just such a nuanced story that it's just a lot to cover. And that's why this episode has been so long, because there's just so much to talk about with this. And the story itself is just so horrible. But
well, oh well. Who knows what it'll take for mainstream, bigger platforms and stuff and these outlets to actually say something about it.
Yeah, well, time will tell how this will affect Conor McGregor and the UFC in the near future. So if you guys have lasted this long in this pretty uncomfortable conversation, thank you for sticking with us for it. We hope that you learned something about this case from us, and maybe you guys have a more educated viewpoint of it because of the stuff we've said. Again, I'll try and link the video that Luke Thomas posted in our description, so if you want to watch that, I definitely encourage you guys to do so. But yeah, that'll be it for the conversation for us, unless there's other news that pops up in the coming weeks or months that, obviously we'll cover if we have to. But yeah, those are the facts of the case. You guys can think of it however you will, and, hopefully, speaking for the both of us, hopefully we don't have to make any more videos like this in the future, because they're not fun conversations. We love talking about the sport and highlighting the positives of the sport, but this is a story that you just can't ignore. So if you guys have stuck with us for the whole conversation, thank you. And, we hope you guys enjoy our more positive content. That's for sure. But yeah, thank you guys, and we'll see you all next time.